You know, because there's just these ideas of love at first sight, but how is that possible when we can never know someone? It seems like it's just these things that we idolize and we think is to be true, and in reality it's just our own projections of what love can be. So love to me is sort of this like very personal thing where essentially it's like a pursuit of something, of like the wholeness, I guess is what Socrates says there, but sort of how I see it. Looks like Fernando right off the bat wants to chime in here.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if it is too windy. I can try to go into a place. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. All right, yes. Yeah, I love what you're saying, Orlando. But I do want to, because something that to me is quite interesting is like, we, at first, I don't know why we all search love, which is something that I would like to see if we can explore today. Like why we always have to like be drawn into what I think always, maybe it's not the case, um, of trying to look into that sensation of love. But how do we even know when we have it? Because like you said, sometimes people say that love at the first sight, but sometimes it's not really love. It's just like I would even argue that sometimes it's just lust. You just kind of like feel attracted physically to the person, but just the physicality makes you love someone. Like like honestly love someone, or maybe there is something more into it, which is something that I would like to see if we can explore today. But yeah.
Looks like Marcus is next here.
Hey, yeah. Well, I was kind of going off of what you were gonna end it off on there, Orlando. You said was it with love we're searching for everything? Was that some along those lines? What
Yeah,
was it?
something
How
like that. Hmm.
that's what you said, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, so well that makes sense to me because I was thinking like right before the meeting started, I was like, okay, well, before we find love, because love is like it does something to like our life, it makes it a bit different, so what if before love, look at it as we're looking to find meaning in everything, but with love it's like we find that one thing means everything, or can we find everything through one thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
It's like that. It's the one thing that like leads to like you can love anything, and so it opens up this like door of like, wow, I have this like special relationship with this thing. Like even the simplest thing, like imagine if someone grew up loving a rock, a pet rock. Okay. And like to them that rock means everything, and to them it can do everything, and it can be anything, but it means the world to them, but it's nothing, so it's a special thing that humans like are very special in our ability to love, because it's not just putting meaning to things, but it's like it's finding. Oh, what am I trying to say, Orlando? There's something beyond like just putting meaning to things that like love does, that humans had the capability to do. You know what I'm saying?
It's like finding color in a colorless world, you know? It's like you're seeing
Yes,
black and white and then all of a sudden green, blue, red. You know, it's sort of like that, I guess you could say.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Marcus.
those are my 2 cents. There was something I was trying to get to there, a sentence that I couldn't formulate, but I'll end there.
That was great. Thanks. Yusha, you're next.
Thanks. Marcus, picking right up on where you left off, I will add that um, loving is a capacity that I don't think anyone can. Yeah, and anyone can develop completely or completely get rid of, in my opinion, at least, because no matter how hard you try, you just can't. Like, for example, in a relationship, a person hurts someone else who between them they truly loved each other, quote unquote, and after that incident where they don't want to be together anymore, they still love each other. I mean, like, they might end up having in some residual emotions or anything like that for each other. And I think this would be a good place to kind of make the distinction between love, infatuation, affection, and you being drawn towards someone. So I think it would be awesome if someone can expand on that, because I know the differences, but by the time I get to explaining to them, I'll take up the entire session for today's meeting. So if Orlando, you're next. I don't know. I mean, if you can
it's a little difficult.
expand on that.
But I mean, I can expand on it a little bit because it kind of goes with what I wanted to say. I mean, in terms of just lust and love, you know, with it seems like lust is just this idolization of something when you're looking at something at its surface area and just appreciating that of what it is. And it's kind of hard to separate that from love because in some ways it seems very similar. But the way I see it is this, you know, kind of taking a naturalistic approach is that like for us, you know, emotions and feelings are just the way I see it's kind of they're all just reactions, you know, to external processes through internal processes from our past experiences, so on and so forth. These are all things that have stimulated. These are all stimulants and certain things that we kind of react to. And that being the case, it seems like love is sort of what I've called it in the past is Godward. That essentially it's like ever encompassing, where basically it excuses all of the other emotions to say, well, I'm mad, but you know what? I love this person. Or, oh, you know what? I feel courage because I love this person. So it seems to be this ever encompassing concept of everything, where essentially, you know, it just seems to be ever present, regardless of what it is. And so it seems to include the good and the bad. Like it includes infatuation, but at the same time, it includes being humble. It includes all these different kind of ever-encompassing ideas, but it puts it in a sense where it's more, I guess, virtuous or more purposeful rather than just meaningless. And it's purposeful and it's meaningful to you. And that's what makes it love, because it means it love to you. And I think that's kind of how I see it. Manzi, you're next here. You got your thinking face on.
That is acting. No, I'm joking. Yeah, listen, I like everything everybody's saying. I was going to speak on sort of a different aspect of it, but I don't want to derail the thought train here. But you know, I will just kind of remind us, because you were kind of going in this direction. The topic, it's not just what is love.
To the beauty supply store.
In relation to identity, personal identity. Can we mute Cedon? Only temporarily, of course. And so I guess my thing is this. I think Marcus said the rock, you might love a pet rock or something like that, and you love it with all your heart. You imbue it with this meaning because, again, it's something that's near and dear to you. What about the things that you love or the people that you love or the traits that you love? What do they say about you? Like, are there some things that are more worthy of love than others? Are there some times in your life, depending on, I guess, your age or whatever, where it quote unquote makes sense to love these things, but then later you should quote unquote love these other things or these other types of people in terms of, you know, family or friends or just beloveds of a more romantic nature? Because I like where you're going with this, Orlando. How do you employ love? Do you use it to justify your actions, even if they aren't necessarily socially acceptable or moral? You do it in the name of love. Is it possible to abuse the way you love? So, I mean, things like that. So how does loving, whatever it might be, how does it bring out who you are? Or how does it in some way indicate to others who you are, not just yourself?
Yeah, good point. All right, Marcus, looks like you're next.
Very well said, Manzi. And I want to get into that just after Orlando. I want to go off of what you said, where you said, you know, love can be both good and bad. And I want to argue against that, where I say I believe, you know, what the love that you call that is quote on the bad side isn't true love, and that it's just disguised as love. But it lacks the true depth that love of the good, just like Manzi was saying, loving good things rather than loving bad things, kind of evokes a certain holiness or righteousness to it, I would say, than loving quote unquote bad things. and therefore loving bad things is therefore whether or not love is involved, sure, then if people say, you can love anything, that's the bad part. But if we set the line where loving, good things is better than loving bad things, then we can understand that, love, yes, it is great, but using it in such a way where we can elicit the most beneficial cost, or we can reap the most benefit from that love. You know what I'm saying? And I think, and I would argue that you get the most benefits from loving the good, and then I want to add more and say what can be said to be the most, the greatest form of love, or the most, if that's the question, the greatest form of expression of love, because that's what you would count it then, right? Otherwise, how can you get, it's an expression then, okay? So what would a tree, if it could, like a tree can't love really then, okay? It's just growing, okay? But a human, we can do things. And so then I can do something for a purpose that can carry weight because I feel a certain way. Okay, if a tree could jump in front of a train for me, would it? It would carry an impact, certainly. Okay, but it can't. But when a human chooses to do something for me in such a way that it sacrifices it in its entirety of its, it's no longer, so would that be the greatest expression of love, is to sacrifice, oneself for someone else, because it's expressing that you're willing and are giving up for the good, not only just the bad. Sacrificing for the bad is a lesser form of that. Okay, but then sacrificing for the good, I guess that would be classified as martyrdom. Then, someone would be a martyr in that sense. Is that a great expression of love? Would that be the pinnacle, or is that just something? Is someone just being crazy? Is that an extreme of love that we shouldn't, celebrate? But where is the line then in killing for love? Is Romeo and Juliet the line? I think that's a little over the board, personally. I think you should hide the poisons if your loved ones have recently died, especially if they're suicidal like that. That's kind of crazy. Really rash decisions were made that could have been avoided. But that's, I see the rest of my, Romeo and Juliet, thing on that.
This guy. Alrighty.
Hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm gonna respond to that, but I'll let Susan go before I do.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay, so like Manzi, I was thinking, I'm interested in exploring concepts and looking for necessary and sufficient conditions and trying to look at the meaning of things, but I was also thinking, as Manzi was, about, the idea that we were going to discuss love and identity. And so I was thinking about love in terms of how love, well, first of all, it seems like maybe you guys had already discussed this. We're talking about love of others, of people. Somebody had talked about love of self, but of course we can love ideas, we can love things, and whatnot. But certainly loving others can reveal, I think it can reveal things to us about our identity, who we are. Loving others can challenge our identity, who we are. And I think that love, as recipients of love, it can change our identity to the extent that we're talking about identity as values, what we think is important, what we consider the good or the bad, to bring in concepts from earlier. It can even change our character. So I think it's interesting to also think about how we can talk about love as recipients of love, but also as givers of love. Be interesting to think about the identity of people who will receive love, but they don't give it, nevertheless they get it, and vice versa. And then back to I think, is it Mark that was speaking just now? I'm not sure. But the previous person who was speaking, they were talking about loving the good versus loving the bad. And something that occurred to me is like, okay, so I was wondering, is he saying that in order for something to be loved, going back to this conceptual nature of this discussion, for something to be loved, is it a necessary condition that the object or recipient love is that which is considered good? And so that opens a can of worms. So what is the good, which of course is a traditional classical problem. But secondly, let's say the good is an important part of love, then is the good a necessary condition? Is it a sufficient condition? Does this get into a conversation about what you hear some people talking about, true love? What the hell is true love? You know, that's what I want. True love, that which is only oriented towards the good. So I don't know. I'm feeling very platonic right now. Go ahead.
Platonic. Ferdinando is next.
Next. Oh, I love so much to hear Susan speak. Well, listen, can you hear me or no?
Yeah, we can hear
I'm
you.
not sure. Okay, thank you. Yes, because actually that's something that I wanted to point out. Like, I don't want to go into the definitions, and I also wanted to say exactly that it is kind of hard to try to argue what is good or bad for someone to love something, because we don't know exactly what that could be for the specific people. But I'm trying to remember such like the point that I was trying to make. Because come back to me, Ferdinando. Those moments I hate them because it's something very important for me to say and I forget them. Okay, I'm gonna just back down a little bit. I do want to address like the identity, like why? Yes, finally. Okay, so let's say for example that we love two objects. Okay, I'm gonna say randomly two objects. Let's say a potato and a tomato. Potato, tomato. But you have to decide one. How can you tell what object you love the most, and what exactly does that entail for, like, what does that say from your personality, your identity? Like, how? I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm sorry, I've been driving too much. Does this make any sense? Maybe somebody can help me saying yes, no, or you're going nowhere, Ferdinando. Please focus. Can I have something?
I think from what I understood from your explanation was, how do we define or how do we measure the love for one thing over the other,
Yes.
or in comparison to the other?
Yes, because we constantly are exposed to things that we like more than others, but sometimes even though you love something very much, probably even better than something else, we have to decide to not keep doing that we love, because it could hurt you. And you have to like and sometimes even like you may love somebody a lot, but you know that if you really care for that person, you have to do something that it may seem like it is not love, but you're doing it because, at least through your experience, you feel like that's going to bring the better outcome for that other person. And those type of decisions say something about your I mean, I guess your moral choices, ethicality, and all that stuff. But I don't know, like, not everybody is educated to kind of like see those kind of things. I believe that most of the time, even in movies, we see like people are trying to like, oh, if you love this person so much, you would do everything. You would bring the moon down, and you would do all this stuff. Like, kind of like I don't think they completely explore like the things that people actually do, allegedly, in the name of love. So that's what I'm trying to see or to explore. Why do we make those decisions? And what do we even believe that, for example, if you actually do something that's going to hurt somebody and you feel like you love them, do you truly love them? Like, I know the whole concept of true love, I don't think really we can go into it, but I mean, how can we assess if that decision was made through love, and if it was even like I don't know. I think I'm elaborating too much, maybe too abstractly, but that's something that I do. I think I would like to hear about it from people who probably are more philosophical educated than myself. Yeah.
Come on, Ferdinando. Why you gotta put yourself down? It makes no sense. You tell the people not to do that, and then you do that. Why?
I'm being humble. I love to be humble. That's what it is.
But
okay, so yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to pick off what you're saying. I mean, I'm going to challenge Susan and Manzi here, because you guys were saying, and then I'm going to challenge Marcus again. But because you guys were saying that we weren't relating to this idea of identity, but I argue I kind of was, because in saying essentially that when we're arguing what love is, essentially we're kind of identifying what we find to be worthy of love, in a sense. And what that can say about us is what we even find to be meaningful. You know, I go back to the quote from Plato where he says, according to Deiotoma, love is not good at all, not God at all, but is rather a spirit that meditates between people and the objects of their desire. Love is neither wise nor beautiful, but is rather the desire for wisdom and beauty. And so, in that saying, essentially, it kind of how you perceive love kind of tells you what you really find to be meaningful in life. You know, when I'm looking at someone who is humble or someone who I believe to be courageous, that means that I find those two things to be worth something. You know, or if I love something like singing or writing, that means that the nature of those things I think are worthy of love. And so therefore, whatever those things are kind of says something about themselves. I can't really explain it. It says something about me to others. You know, if you go into someone's house and they tell you, "Oh, I love having a clean house," you automatically draw certain perceptions of them. Now, if you go into someone's house and it's dirty and they're all unkept, you know, you draw certain perceptions of that as well. So it's sort of this characteristic of not even a question of love, but of meaning. And that sort of always seems to be the question of identity, what someone finds to be meaningful. And that's why I kind of didn't go down that route. But sort of to kind of challenge Marcus, this idea of good and bad, I didn't mean in the very general way of good and evil, more of in society, we kind of look at things like infatuation as bad. But I'd say that love involves infatuation, where you're infatuated with that of which you love. If I'm infatuated with, you know, wanting to succeed in life, I love success. Or if I'm infatuated with writing, I love writing, so on and so forth. It's like it's an involvement of sort of these very conceptual and purposeful things. And that, with that being the case, you know, I kind of wonder, you know, is love just a placeholder word? Does it really have this true expression? Is it really this magical thing that we think it is, or is it just this placeholder for something that we can't describe? That's kind of my big idea of it. And
Okay.
Marcus, you're next.
Going off that, Orlando, I still want to challenge, you know, loving certain things over other things is really important. Because I believe Susan was also talking about true love earlier. You know, what is true love? And I want to argue that, you know, we're talking about identity here, and you know what people love and the things they love, and maybe even receive love from, is really a lot of what shapes, you know, a person's identity. Because, you know, like we're saying, this is what a person deems the most valuable or meaningful to them. So what if that is, there's certain things that two people love or experience love from, etc., throughout their life, that in such a way it forms their identity, where they meet, and then it allows them to have this more pure or more successful expression of love between them because of that. You know, that's if you want to get down to a science of love, I guess that's the one. And then I want to argue more that because of that could be the case, that certain things that you love can maybe even attract other things, is what I mean to say then there. And that loving good things could maybe even attract better things than loving bad things does, or loving certain things does over, or loving certain things over other things. Say if you prioritize like work, say you love work over your family, all right, but you say, and you convince yourself that like you're doing it for your family because you love your family, but you're sacrificing the love that you would get from prioritizing and loving your family more than you would, you know, staying late, you know, on Friday night at work, etc. So there's a trade-off there, and loving certain things reaps better rewards, you know, in the end. What benefits you more? Loving certain things, prioritizing certain things, gives a certain, you know, because humans, we react to what, you know, we appreciate. You know, I look into a room every day. If I have a certain object there that I look at, you know, and ponder on every day, it's going to leave an impact on me. Okay, that we're very influential like that. So if we start appreciating something, that thing that we're appreciating is also going to rub back on us. You know, it's a mirror effect. You know, we're going to influence each other. So therefore, if you stick your hand, you know, into something that, you know, is like real muddy and, you know, sticky and not good, like imagine it, you know, oracle sense. Okay, and it sticks to you, and you don't want it to stick, like, but the intention was, it wasn't like that, but it does that, and it affects other, you know, it leaves an imprint on you rather than cleaning yourself, rather. Okay, imagine some things leave an imprint that, you know, when you love them, the imprint that they leave on you from your love and your appreciation of them is different than, you know, you loving certain other things. Certain other things could even cleanse you. You believe it or not, you know, imagine it like that. Because what if, you know, there's a certain reciprocal feeling that we get, or you know, connection that is formed from loving and having have loved and receiving love from, you know, said holy things, or, you know, good things. And I would argue, you know, when you get down to brass tacks, yeah, everything would it not be better to love good things rather than bad things? Because, like we just said, I would argue that it benefits you more to love the good than the bad. But
Yeah.
some would argue that loving the bad can be more beneficial, because then, you know, you can one up your fellow man, etc. And then, you know, if you want to look at it from a selfish point of view, but again, then that's the abuse of love, if we want to talk about that. And I'll stop talking there. That was a lot, but yeah.
Nice. All right, Mr. Manzi here.
Yeah, I'm loving these comments. And yeah, Marcus, that was fantastic. And Orlando, I will say you did a great job of defending yourself there. You were speaking on identity. I agree. Just getting back to, because honestly, Marcus sounds very platonic in his understanding of things. And so I just want to kind of briefly say, and I want to pass the baton to everybody that's next, is that, you know, there's I guess, if I'm kind of simplifying for the sake of conversation, there's two ways to sort of look at the standards by which we determine love in terms of its proper quote unquote object. If you want to talk about loving good things and loving bad things, that kind of suggests that there's an inherent value to some things, and it could be greater or lesser depending on what the thing or the phenomenon is. But that implies that there's an inherent value to all things that's not really up to you. So it's like, if you're loving the wrong thing, or if you're loving something more than maybe it deserves to be loved, then you're just wrong, like a mathematical equation. That's very different from, say, a place where there isn't necessarily any inherent value to anything, and the value comes from people deciding what is and is not deserving of love, even just temporarily. So it's so funny, we were bringing up Plato, and Susan referenced the forms, the ideas of Plato. It's like these intangible objects of our affection, and Plato argues that is the proper object of love. But remember, Plato says love is not itself a form. Love is not one of the ideas. And he makes that point in the Symposium, in fact. So I think that's fascinating, because I think what it suggests is that for somebody like Plato and you know, those in his tradition, even Augustine going all the way to the medieval ages, love basically is the soul. It's that which is the bridge between the lover and the beloved. So if you need love to appreciate the beauty or value of an object, that means that love itself cannot be that thing. That it cannot be an object. It has to be the bridge. I think that ties back to what Orlando was saying, honestly. This notion of deciding, well, I don't want to say completely deciding for yourself, because, I mean, here's the other kicker that we haven't really touched upon yet. Sometimes love seizes you. Sometimes the object, it seizes upon you in a way where you have no choice. Object, person, idea, activity, whatever the case may be. And that's when you begin to realize, based upon the things that you are naturally gravitating towards, who you are. That's where your identity, I think, comes out in those instances where, again, Plato Socrates compares love to a madness, because you're not rational sometimes. When we talk about love at first sight and stuff like that, and you can argue, is that lust, what have you, but there is this aspect of love where we are not in control. And yet we act and behave and are motivated by it in a way that's unlike any other kinds of motivations. All right, that's all.
Man, what the heck, Manzi? Yeah. That. Alrighty, Miss Professor Benton. I don't know why I said Miss Professor. That makes no sense, but Professor Benton.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good, because I didn't know if these were working. So what I was gonna say had to do with what Ferdinando said, like a year ago, so I hope I can remember what I was trying to say. But I think what he was talking about, in part, he didn't use the word, I don't think, but he was kind of getting at the idea of unconditional love. I think he was talking about, we were talking about the good and the bad and standards and values for that thing. And that made me think of Ayn Rand, you know, who very much argues against the notion of unconditional love, with the point being that, and I talk to my students about this a lot, when we don't have conditions for something or we don't have value, then one could argue that thing becomes meaningless. So for example, if one were to unconditionally love, let's just say someone, that suggests that there's this notion that it doesn't matter what kind of person that is or what they do or whether they are good or bad, or even if their values indicate the type of person they are because what they value is good or bad. And it seems to me that often we hear unconditional love as promoted as something that we should strive for, or that it's a good thing because it doesn't judge and doesn't have standards. And I'm not making a comment about that either way. I just would like to kind of throw this in the mix, that the idea of unconditional love does in fact then there's no standard or anything that we're judging it against. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of just interested in how we could connect that into this notion of, we're both talking about the lover, and if someone loves something that's bad, you know, the objectivity and subjectivity of that and whether that makes that person good or bad. And then also the lover, if they're loving someone else who loves that which is bad or is, we could deem bad. So I'm just kind of throwing that into the mix in terms of how this notion of not having standards for that which we love, what that does to love itself. How does it render the idea of love? Okay, back on mute.
Good point. Good point. It makes you question if unconditional love is even real, really. Yeah. And Susan, you are next.
Okay, so I'm not going to follow up on that point, but really good points, everybody. So I'm going to come back to Orlando when he was responding to me, to Manzi and myself, and it's not a challenge or an objection, but a clarification, and that is, at first, Orlando, my take on what was going on in the conversation was that you were simply using your identity to focus the discussion on love at a conceptual level. So I definitely 100% agree with you that the entire time that you were focusing on the concept of love, that had to do and was relevant to your identity, because that is what you value. Maybe you value conceptual exploration. So I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. So definitely I'm on par with that. But what I would like to suggest is that at the beginning you were simply using and revealing your identity through discourse and your focus on the concept. And it wasn't until you responded to me and Manzi that you made an explicit assertion about a connection between love and identity, if that makes sense. That's all.
Definitely. Alrighty, thank you. And looks like we have Isra here. Awesome. You are next.
All right. Okay, so from what I've heard so far, something that Marcus said kind of made me have a question. That he mentioned that humans give value to other things or other people, and if we love something, if it's good or bad, that's how we place value to it, and so on and so forth. So the question arises that when it comes to other living beings, does that give us the right to place value on somebody else's life or somebody else's being or existence by valuing our love for them? For example, I say that I love my mother the most, and for example, there's another friend. They, of course, do not compare, but to me, the friend is more dear than my mother. So does that give me the right to place value on my mother's life and compare it to the value of my friend's life? Because I love the object, or because I love that person, or that's how I weigh my love for them. And then what Professor Benton says, or made me question another thing, that if we're placing unconditional love on someone or something, does that make that thing valueless or even more valuable? In terms that we're going to go to the ends of the world for that person or for that thing to be okay, especially when it comes to a mother, the love of a mother for a child. There's nothing, no harm that she won't bear for the protection and safety of the child, and that's unconditional. So does that mean to that mother that child is valued less or even more valuable because of the fact that she's placing unconditional love on that child? So these were the two questions that once I started hearing, I came in a little bit late, so I apologize for that. But those were the two questions. And then tying it to the identity thing, I think based on societies, when we make our identities or form the opinions of our own identities based on other people's placing value on ourselves. And that's why I asked the question that is it fair for us to place value on someone else, saying that, oh, you're deserving of my love and you're not. Even though that's just my perception, it could be that that person is or isn't. But that's not something I know. That's just something I feel, or that's just something I've made up on my own, that, yeah, you deserve to be loved by me, you don't, and you don't even make the cut, right? So how does that decision impact the other person's identity or their self-esteem in terms of, oh, this person doesn't think I deserve their love? How does that form that person's identity, especially when it comes to our close relations, or when it comes to, let's say, our significant other? We say that I'm doing my best on my end to make sure that you're okay, but the way you're receiving those actions is not the same language that we're speaking, or it's not the same way that I express love that's equal to you. So to me, I could be doing the hardest thing that can be, saying, being vulnerable to you or whatever, but to you, that's a normal given that all human beings should do. So to you, that means that I don't love you, but I know I do. So how do we compare that? Okay, do we love each other the same way or whatever? I guess would be my next question for on the floor or whatever.
Dang, a lot of good points. Really, really made me think about some things. Great, thanks. Alrighty, Professor Benton.
That was me a long time ago. I already said what I was going to say. I was jumping in there several times because my exclamation mark kept going up, and I didn't know if anybody saw it. So.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. Alrighty, Marcus.
Okay. Yeah. Israel, you really made me think of something there. When you said whether a parent's unconditional love for a child, does that deem, does it make the child, the object of that love, less, especially if it's the child of the mother, etc. And I think that's a great point to be made, that loving certain things then is good, because the unconditional love of a child that a parent has cannot be said to be a what's the word, a vice. It's not a, there's no ill benefits that one receives from that showing unconditional love to a child, wherein I would argue almost every other case, you bear some consequences from what just the relationship then would be formed from that unconditional love. But I think that is proof that there is, maybe a pure form of unconditional love. And then that could be even said that that's the mark for goodness, is to love, a child or your child, or that is the standard for good, maybe, the love of a parent for their child. That's all I had to say, because that was really making me think, and I was like, ooh, that's a great.
Just to kind of go off what you're saying, Marcus, I kind of want to challenge this idea of unconditional love, because wouldn't you say then, like maybe the example between a parent and their children, couldn't you say that the condition is circumstance, that because they are their children, that's why they are loved? If the circumstance was different and they weren't their children, would they just not cease to love them? So if that's the case, doesn't it seem like our love is conditional in many ways? I mean, when you have a lifelong friend, wasn't the condition that when you first met them, they had certain qualities that attracted you to them, and they have either retained those qualities or garnered new ones that have made you love them even more? It seems like, I don't know, it seems to me like unconditional love is sort of a paradox. I don't think it exists.
Well, here's the thing. The parents, they made those conditions, man. They were there for the existence of, ever since they existed on earth. They were there for the birth. So I think it's a bit different. Parents love them before they're born, before there are even conditions to love them by. You know, they love them before they exist in this world, as another thing. So what if that
No.
that can be said
But
to be different?
But
is it
not all the time.
isn't that true
What?
that doesn't it implicate though that like some parents don't always love their children, you know? And so if that's the case, the implication of giving birth to a child doesn't necessarily implicate love, you know? So that I don't know if that's necessarily the
Okay, well,
case.
okay, imagine it like this. So imagine Ted Bundy's mother, okay? Is she wrong for showing him love before he was born or before he committed those things? No, or not knowing that he was always technically going to become or be that thing, you
Well,
know?
Marcus, I think that's a very bad example because I watched like the little YouTube series on them, and actually, he had a very bad relationship with his mother, and she actually
Okay,
kicked him
well,
out of the
okay.
house.
I just meant okay, just take everything else except the fact that he did something bad. Okay, that's all I meant.
I
Okay,
understand what you're
take
saying, though. I
everything
get
else
what you're
out.
saying.
The only
Essentially,
thing
you're
that
saying
matters is that he did something bad.
that even if you
He
commit
doesn't know. He
atrocities,
grew up as a murderer. Okay,
I get you. Yeah.
with a parent that loved him and showed him unconditional love beforehand. You know, was he
I get what you're saying,
supposed to
that like
be
even if you grow up to commit atrocities, essentially you expect your mother to be the only person who still loves you. But I think that's a generalization that maybe doesn't always hold to be truth. But that's just my response to that. But I mean,
I know.
and like what Isra was saying about like identity, I think it holds to be true. You know how others love you because like kind of what you're saying, Marcus. You know, your identity in big part has to do with how your parents loved you. If you in this concept of loving, learning how to love, you kind of first understand that from your parents and how they interacted with you and how you then interacted with them. So from that concept of love and loving each other in that exchange, you kind of grow to love how to love your friends, how to love your significant others from watching your parents, so on and so forth. So this concept of love from your parents, from your early friends, your childhood friends, your siblings, you know, later on in life, it really affects you in a way where essentially your perception and your concept of love is completely affected. And your personality and identity in that sense is affected because then you interact with others in a very specific way because of this prior knowledge of love. So that's all I had to say about that. Ferdinando, you are next.
Oh, thank you. You did touch on a couple of things that I wanted to say to Marcus. Yeah, I mean, I will agree that love is not just formed through our parents, but they do play some important roles there if you have them. But I don't think that not everyone grow to have love of parents, or as Israel was mentioning, that sometimes their love is not being seen through us. Like maybe we don't understand it until maybe we grew up and start understanding a little bit more what life is. So something that I was thinking is like, can we even say that there is like a way, like a truly way to profess love? Because I mean, it is true. We all have our, even though we speak the same language, we all have our unique language on our own. And sometimes what we believe is love, the other person do not perceive it that way. But that doesn't mean that the love is not there. So like, yes, like I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that I know I forgot. Like it has been happening to me the whole day. Jesus Christ. I just don't think that there is like a clear way to show what love is. And I don't know exactly how can we. Okay, I lost my train of thought. That's true. That's so sad. I have to work again into back and forth into readjusting my thought. But something that I do want to say is this: I do believe that a big part of love, at least in my end, I don't know what does that say on my identity, is that normally, regardless of what I feel, at the end of the day, I choose to love something. I don't know exactly what does that say on my identity. That's something for me to explore. But regardless of like how I can be feeling or not, even if something is making me mad at some point, I know that it's not just a physical thing. It involves more aspects. And sometimes I cannot completely understand why it is, but I know that I'm choosing to love it because there is something in it that either I want to to have for longer in my life, or I want to like acquire on for myself. I don't know if that makes sense. For example, like maybe some object, I don't have it, but with that object, I don't know, let's say it's a jet ski. You allow me to fly for like a 30 minutes. So I want to be able to love, like I love to fly, and that jet ski will allow me that skill for it to happen. So I feel like there is, at least in my end, decision is part of it. And yeah, I'm just gonna say that. And I know I forgot something. Hopefully I just remember it in the time. Yeah.
No, that was good. You said you're mumbled in your head, but I think you did it pretty good. So thanks. I kind of agree with what you're saying there. But Isra, you are next.
Okay, so I will jump off with Fernando's point where he said there's no proper expression of love or there's no understanding towards love, and I will disagree to that because there's an actual book on this by Dr. Gary Chapman called Five Love Languages. Essentially, that he's a relationship expert or something like that. I don't know too much detail, but the podcast that I've been hearing, he's been coming up a lot. So that's why I bring this up, because I just remembered. So essentially, according to him, there are five types of people, or five categories where people get fit into. And those, essentially, the way you understand your partner's love language is that, for example, does the person expect you to bring them gifts because of how they were brought up? For example, if your birthdays were celebrated primarily by giving of gifts and said that, okay, you have one wish, whatever you want will come true, and we'll make it happen as your parents, and so on. To that person, love means that sentiment or that over the top expression of physical gestures that you show by presenting gifts and so on. But on the other hand, if a person is more used to having spent more quality time with their parents, for example, same example as the birthday, there is a woman whose childhood was spent in during the birthdays where both mom and dad would take off from work. They would take the schools out from the kids as well, and just spend that entire day for that person's birthday doing an activity together instead of actually giving them gifts like material goods. So to that person, quality time, attention, and so on and so forth would be the meaning of love. That, okay, if you're paying attention to me, and if you're taking care of the time in terms of the type of time you're spending with me, to me, that's love. She doesn't care about gifts. She doesn't care about anything that you would bring her. So that kind of an understanding between the couple might be the expression of love, or that might be their language of love. That's the idea that the doctor is introducing in the book, in terms of how do you identify your love language versus how do you identify the partner's love language. Now, moving back from that, Orlando said earlier that the parents' love can't be, the parents' love should be, it was essentially something about parents' love, but I feel like you cannot compare parents' love to any other kind of love because of the fact that it's a natural born relation, and it cannot be formed with with another being. You can adopt a child, sure, but again, that comes into the parent guardian kind of a love, and you can't. I don't think you can experience that until you actually care for another person that way. For example, older and younger sibling dynamics. If the age difference is significant and you're primarily held responsible for taking care of the younger ones, or you're told that, hey, he's your responsibility, you got to keep him safe, or make sure they don't fall into bad habits and so on. Even though you're the sibling, the love you have for your sibling is almost paternal, where that becomes unconditional, that no, I'm responsible for this person, so I need to take care of them. So I don't think it can be compared with the romantic kind of love that you have between two people, because of the fact that this is a different change dynamic. Another thing that came up was the idea of unconditional love still exists outside of the parent-child relation, and that's usually when you'd say that, oh, this person is so devoted to the other. For example, we've heard the phrases that if you truly love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, that's when it was meant for you, and so on, right? So many romantic movies and rom-coms and so on had that kind of a message, that if you really do love something, set it free and see if it comes back to you, that means that love belongs to you. And I think the way I interpret that would be that if it comes back to you part, means that they also have similar love for you, where they left everything that they had and they came back to you. That would be a mutual unconditional love. The other way around would just be that you're overly devoted to that person, but that person doesn't recognize that you're going above and beyond for me, or you're going extraordinary lengths just to prove that you love me. So I think those are like a couple of things that came up during the conversation, where I feel like it needed to be, I think, elaborated on a little bit more. That love itself, I don't think, is chosen. It happens, and it's not something you can control, because love is irrational. Love is completely, it doesn't make sense. It makes you question or make decisions, like Marcus said, that it makes you have decisions that don't make sense or aren't necessarily in your benefit, but you still do it because you love the other person, or because you think that they're going to appreciate you more if you did so and so for that person. So I don't think love can be controlled. I think it's something that happens. And I don't think you can lie to yourself and say that, no, I don't love it, but your heart knows the truth that no, it is still there. You can change it, you can say what you want about it, but I don't think love can be chosen. It's something that happens on its own. And once it happens, I don't think it can, over time, it can diminish based on the other person's activities or based on the other person's reaction to you. But I really don't think that it's something that's an easy fix. Like, okay, I was in love yesterday and now I'm not anymore because I came to my senses.
Yes, I cannot respond very quick because I am in a place that is giving me 30 minutes free internet, and I'm afraid I'm about to run out of time. But I do want to say this. I'm not saying all love is chosen, but for example, I do believe there is an educated way to love. I cannot expand too much into it. But it is true that sometimes you just happen, but you can choose how to feel it and how to like express it outside, which is also something that I wanted to mention. And you said that at the beginning there were like a couple of ways where somebody was saying different ways on how people show love in relationships. But I don't completely agree. I do believe that it's true that people choose to love in like those who want to do gifts and something like that. But even that is very subjected to the person and the culture they are in. I don't think that's like true to everyone in everywhere. And like we cannot apply that to every culture. I do believe that it's true in some cases. I just don't believe it's true in everyone cases. What was the other point? I know I'm about to get time. Jesus Christ. What was the other point? I forgot what was the other point. That's sad. Well, it's sad. I think I'm gonna run out of time. Anyways, yes, I'm in a time schedule today, sadly. But the point is this: like, I do agree that you cannot choose to love everything, but you can choose how to show it. I don't think there is like a general way of how to profess it, because that changes on personal. And I also don't agree on like all paternal love or maternal love is natural born. Sometimes that doesn't happen at all, which is sad. But I also believe that those who happen to have it, it is very big, and like hardly anything can compare to it when it happens. But yeah, I'm just gonna try to keep it very short to the point. Because I know I'm about to go without wanting to go. Sorry if I skip someone.
Yeah, Manzi is us there waiting. Hey, Manzi, I'm gonna skip you too. Can we say something real quick? Because I'm gonna go as well. But I kind of do agree with Fernando. It's like there's no universal standards. I think you said it yourself, Esther. We all have personal standards in how we perceive love and how we choose to see love, and that's what gives us our personal is how it relates to our personal identity, essentially. And going to like your challenging of the parents and like their kind of love, and you can't compare it to anything else. I think you kind of can. I mean, I think artists and their creations, I think maybe writers and their poems, maybe, you know, these musicians and their songs, because it's a creation that they have come to, and it's something that they feel strongly about, that it's like a part of them that has come to fruition into reality. I think that can be a good comparison, but not necessarily the same. In that instance, I kind of agree with Fernando as well. Is like giving birth does not imply love as well. It's like, just because I have children doesn't mean I'm going to love them. It's something that they have to essentially come to, and it's since they kind of do have to work at. It's not necessarily always impulsive, although it can be. I agree with that as well. And then just the last thing, I think. Wait, no, that was the last thing. Okay, well, yeah, that's it. Now, Manzi, you can go ahead, have your thingy here. I'm gonna head out, guys. Thank you for the discussion. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Orlando. Yeah, I mean, I guess we are technically over time, so we can't wrap it up on time, maybe for the first time all semester. Again, I guess I'll just say this real quick. Well, first of all, this idea of love being somehow natural is going to be what tomorrow's film argues for. This idea that love is somehow hardwired into our brain, and it's related to a lot of other, I guess, biochemical reactions, you know, neuron synapses firing in such a way where love is basically a stimulus response kind of thing. So it's going to argue for a very biological based, again, biochemical based definition of love. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, or you want to hear it out and then maybe try to challenge it on its own terms, that's what we'll be doing tomorrow. So again, that's going to be at, we're going to open up the doors at 4 o'clock. 4:30 will be when we start the screening. It's 55 minutes. So we'll wrap up about 5:30, and then we'll have a conversation. So one very much like this, but I think it's going to be more towards this idea of like natural love in a very, again, scientific sense, a very psychological sense. But yeah, having said that, I'm glad Isra brought up the love language thing, because that's kind of where I was going to take it, is this idea of sort of, again, getting back to personal identity, self-expression of your love, self-expression of a thing that you have no control over, yet seems to very much at times perhaps dominate your thoughts and your will and your actions. But without sort of going back to the love language in particular, I want to focus on one kind of thing. And this brings us all the way back to Marcus with the sacrifice and the martyrdom and stuff that he was talking about earlier. And it goes back to something Jennifer was saying too in the chat as well about choosing relationships. I suppose it's like this. Are you willing to sacrifice by way of changing who you are for the sake of somehow honoring a love that you cannot really attain unless you're able to, in Isra's example, learn a new love language, learn your partner's love language in a way that is going to allow your love to sort of grow, but it requires you to change in a very deep and maybe permanent way. I mean, so we talk about sacrifice in the sense of, again, you know, you sacrifice your resources, you sacrifice your time and effort and energy. But what does that really mean? It means you're willing to sacrifice a part of you and change yourself for better or for worse for the sake of something that you love. And again, it doesn't have to be a person. I think Orlando referenced arts. I mean, consider the quote unquote starving artists who are willing to change their entire lifestyle for the sake of, again, pursuing an activity that allows them to express their love of the world or beauty or whatever the case may be. So I just wonder to what extent, I guess it's healthy to sort of, again, this is part of the identity question. If it's healthy, quote unquote, to change yourself in ways that would be considered sacrifices for the sake of your beloved, or is that in a funny way sort of the antithesis of love, where if you have to change too much, maybe you're not loving the right thing or right person, stuff like that. I mean, what do y'all think? Yeah, I don't think we have a line anymore. So if you got something to, I mean, in the queue. So if you have something to say, yeah, feel free to sort of just blurt it out.
Okay, so I think, repeat your question. There was a thought that was coming, but in the process of putting it in the chat, I kind of forgot. So repeat what you just said.
Oh yeah, so this idea of, I mean, so when you brought up stuff like your different love languages, different forms of, and going back to Fernando's point, different forms of expressing your love, and then tying it back to this notion of love as somehow requiring sacrifice, which is kind of funny because, again, sometimes love seizes you and you have no control over it, but then the way you take control of it is sort of a response that seems to require sacrifice. So I just wonder if there's a threshold to the amount that one should be willing to change, or perhaps it's one is led by love to change and maybe somehow kind of self-actualize. I know you're a fan of Maslow, to sort of self-actualize in a way that they wouldn't have if they didn't pursue love, and in that endeavor, in that pursuit, change who they are.
So I think there are two ways of it, or two approaches towards it, of change in terms of love changing you. So I think the first one would be that you're not actually experiencing love itself. You're in the early stages of still deciding if it is love. You don't know if it is. You're still confused about it if you're not certain. But in pursuit of identifying that, you organically transition into that change, and you say that, okay, for example, I smoke and a person who loves me doesn't like smoking, or they're allergic to nicotine or whatever. I make that sacrifice, consciously make that decision that, okay, if I truly love that person, I won't smoke anymore. Not out of concern of my own health, but because it annoys them or because they're allergic to it. Or, for example, if somebody knows that I am afraid of heights, or I'm not comfortable riding on a plane, which I am, but it's just an example, then in that case, they would do their best to kind of find alternative routes so that I find it more enjoyable, or I'm able to enjoy the time we're spending together instead of just focusing on something that's making me uncomfortable. Even though a plane might be more convenient, they still offer a different way just to make me more comfortable, or just to make me accommodate my feelings or whatever. So in that case, I think when the change happens that way, it's more organic and it's more for your own benefit kind of a deal as well. However, when it's not love, it's obsession, and somebody tries to force themselves out of habits, that's when it's detrimental to you and that person as well, because that person fails to recognize that you're doing this for them. They still are oblivious to the fact that what you consider love is actually obsession, but you're still doing it for the other person. So I think when it's forced or beat into position, that's when it's more detrimental and it's not healthy for anybody. But when it's organically done over time, slowly turned into a habit, which can then be turned into mindfulness and so on and so forth, that's when I feel like it's healthy for everybody involved, where nobody has this accusation at the end of the day that for you, I did this, this, and this. In that case, the for you element is missing now, because they're able to recognize that I did this out of my own voluntary will. I did not do this for someone else. It just happened. I made that conscious choice by myself. You see the difference?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic response. I think you really got something there. It's troubled insofar as I think some people are attempting to manufacture the organic aspect of things, and maybe they wait and wait, and then it never happens. But I mean, more to your point, that's indicative of perhaps forcing the entire relationship.
So there's a thing that I don't think love can be, love is one-sided. I feel like love needs to be fostered and paid attention to, and it needs to be recognized by someone else as well for you to make that organic transition. Like I said, if somebody kept ignoring you, but you were still under the pretense that maybe, hopefully, they might fall in love with me as well, that's when that feeling turns into obsession in terms of why not? That kind of an urge that why not me, you know? So in that case, I think if you understand, if you have that level of self-awareness, and if you're able to recognize that, okay, when am I slipping, or when is it actually turning into harm? That's when you really need to push yourself out of it and be like, is this really love? Because from what I've heard, people say that love is a positive thing. It's not supposed to be negative, or it's not supposed to make you feel negative or congested, or it's not supposed to make you feel cooped up. But in fact, it sets you free, or all those other romantic notions of, okay, when somebody finds love, they're able to do whatever they want. So in that case, I think so long as we're able to walk that fine line and we're able to identify that, okay, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? Because that's what dictates your reaction to the other things that follow up. So in that case, I feel like love needs to be fostered and nurtured. And for that, it first needs to be recognized. And I think that's where a lot of people had this misconception. And that's why I think there was such a need of the book of languages of love and so on to kind of identify that, okay, you're both in love, but you're not speaking the same language. You're not communicating with each other the same way.
Yeah, I mean, and I especially like that in explaining kind of the early stages of love. But what about the phenomena of when love fades? What if you've been with somebody for a very long time and suddenly, just like love seizes upon you and says, yeah, you love this person whether you want to or not, that love can just leave whether you want it to or not. And then you have to ask yourself, again, this is what I mean by manufacturing the phenomenon. You're sitting there, you're like, I got to try to remember what I love about this person, or what I love about this job, or what I love about this activity. And you can try really hard and you can remember those times, when it was all fresh and new, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will restore the feeling. And in that sense, I mean, what ought one to do? Recognize, just say, you should say, as you said, you recognize that the love is there. Do you have to recognize when the love is gone?
So I don't think love can ever be gone. I don't agree with the phrase of love fades. I think it doesn't fade. The intensity lowers because now if you look at it kind of like a planet and you look at the core of the planet, it's so tiny, but it's really dense and it's really heavy. So I think in later years of life, if you've had a successful love life, or if you've successfully been able to foster your relationships with people, not only just your partner, but with your siblings, with your parents, and so on, I don't think that love fades away. Like, I think it shrinks down to that more concentrated core, to where like, to your truth and your reality that I do love this person, and there's nothing that they can do that can make me diminish from that love. And I think that's when people confuse it with love fading away. I don't think it fades away. I think it just becomes more condensed and becomes more solid, where it becomes part of your reality and it becomes part of your existence that, yeah, the love is real and I do know that I love this person. So in that notion, I don't feel it fades away. That's why I disagree with love doesn't fade away. I think people just feel like it does because it doesn't. You don't feel it so intensely, or you don't feel it so immediately now. It just becomes your normal routine, and sometimes when things become normal, that's when you kind of start missing them and be like, why doesn't it feel the same way anymore?
All right, I mean, look, I'm just playing the cynical devil's advocate here, so to speak. I like your
time. Yeah, I think we're above time, and I think everybody's just waiting for us to get done.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. He threw an exclamation mark up. Did you want to say something?
No, we can skip him.
He said the same thing to you at the conference. I think you hurt his feelings when you said you love your mom the most. That's your brother. All right, well,
the same thing. He's such a mama's boy. He would say the same thing. Like he wouldn't bat an eye just leaving me on the street if it were between my mom and I. Like, there's no question about it. That's the way it is with all of us.
All right, fair enough. Well, all right, folks, thanks for coming and hanging out with us. Again, tomorrow we have the film. They'll be screening at 4:30. We'll open up the door at 4. Feel free to join us. It's a lot of fun. Again, it's going to be a quick movie, not even an hour long, but that just gives us more time to talk about it. And again, like I said,
see it earlier. Because I think I might not be able to watch the movie with you guys, but I do want to participate in the discussion. So is there a way I can watch it earlier and just like participate in the discussion later?
Yeah, for sure. So everybody, every student in the district in Dallas College, they have access to Kanopy. It's spelled with a K, Kanopy. Yeah. So if you go to the Kanopy site, or you can download the app as well, I believe. And you search the title of the film, which is Pleasure and Pain, The Science of Love. It'll come up, and yeah, you can watch it at your leisure. And yeah, feel free to join us for the conversation if you'd like. And again, you can go back and look in the history here in Microsoft Teams and see some of the discussions from the previous films from this semester. They're even more informal than these discussions, frankly. So yeah, you're more than welcome to join us. If you want to just listen in on the conversation, you can join us and not necessarily talk, but yeah, you're more than welcome to sort of listen and communicate in the chat if you'd like as well. All right, I guess that'll do it, folks. I can't believe it's December. We've been holding these Philosophy Club meetings every week since, I don't know, 2 Decembers ago or something. Time flies with a PH. All right, so that'll do it. Now, I'm glad you guys stuck around. You're in for a treat. I've prepared an acoustic, rather a cappella rendition of I Want to Know What Love Is. So, and a 1. 2. You should cut the recording. I'm joking, folks. All right, that'll do it. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
You too.
Thanks. You know, it's also worth pointing out, philosophy literally means love of wisdom, philosophia. So the Philosophy Club means the love of wisdom club. I meant to bring that up too, but well. All right, so long.